So, professional advisors have really got a pivotal role to play in helping clients with their sustainable business transformation. But it is a dynamic area, as we've just been talking about, and it can be hard to know where best to start and how to approach this. So, I'm glad today to share some findings from my recent board and general counsel interviews that I've been conducting, and also what I deduce as the three key ways that firms can approach this important task. So over the last year, I've been conducting a series of board interviews with the World Economic Forum on the future of the corporation and stakeholder governance. That's with my former firm, Baker McKenzie. And then in parallel, I've been conducting some general counsel interviews on why sustainability matters to them. So I've got an interesting sort of compare and contrast. But this research has clearly shown that environmental social governance, ESG, is now top of both board and, in the case of law firms, general counsel's agendas. And that's particularly because of the focus on brand reputation, the search for growth that we've been hearing about, and also mitigating risks. And I think Unilever are often held out as a real beacon in this area. And I quite like Alan Jupe's recent comment that he made. There's a very strong business case, which simply put is where our brands compete on a platform that is purposeful, whether it's a sustainable environmental proposition or a social benefit. These brands are growing at roughly twice the rate of the rest of our portfolio. And our portfolio is now about 60% of what we would call purpose-led brands. Yet interestingly, the research I've been doing shows that firms are yet to approach clients in the way that they're looking for, which is they're looking for a more strategic, a more client-centric, the listening point, and a coordinated manner. And so I'm going to suggest today that there's three key issues to tackle to be able to do this well. First of all, really get to grips with the board's sustainability agenda. Not all businesses are at the same place on ESG. Some have fully embraced what we would know as stakeholder capitalism. So for them, the purpose of the company, their business, is to serve the interests of all their material stakeholders for longer term value creation, rather than more of a shorter term focus on maximizing shareholder returns. And I just mentioned Unilever as an example. They have sustainability embedded in their DNA, and they have their compass, which really acts as their guiding light. But even they will say it's a work in progress. But importantly, there's a lot of new businesses that firms can really help. Businesses like Habito, the new digital mortgage online provider, and it has sustainability enshrined in its B Corp structure. So B Corps are really interesting. They're growing rapidly. There's now 3,500 of them around the world, large and small businesses. But businesses and sectors are at different places on sustainability and ESG. So it's important, first of all, in your work to get to grips with their strategic board agenda. And from that, you can work out where their most material ESG opportunities and risks and what their sort of tone is all about. So don't lead with your solutions, start with the client. The second area that came out really clearly in my research is it's important to understand the client's stakeholder landscape afresh. So look at this afresh. Now, businesses have typically looked at stakeholders in terms of those that are in direct line of their sight. So obviously their customers, their employees, investors, shareholders. But what they haven't done, and many are now admitting this, is they've been less effective at looking at these stakeholder groups and looking into these stakeholder groups for voices less heard, typically minorities, or more distant voices, so future generations or within their supply chains. And this has been brought to fore, as we all know, through the Black Lives Matter movement and also climate change movement. And particularly now, investors, we're all seeing a much greater rise of investor activism, particularly on governance. And this is at a time when investors are really key to helping finance the transition for businesses. So do look at your client's stakeholder landscape afresh to know where the dynamics are and how you can best help them. The third area is think about ESG in a cohesive, rounded way. Now, businesses haven't always approached ESG in a rounded way, but this is changing and it's needed. So if we take, say, the energy sector as an example, we've seen great progress on the E, particularly with the widespread shift to renewable energy. But question within the energy, within the mining industries, there's obviously been a lot less focus on the S. Have they really taken on board the reputational financial risks of failing to understand the communities, the new communities in which they operate? Governance as well is coming to the fore, the G, and traditionally that's all been around board composition, compensation, competencies. But I believe we're going to see a much bigger focus on the stakeholders, the who and the how. So firms do need to consider ESG in a more cohesive way with their service lines and think about broader capabilities adjacent to their core capabilities that they may need to include and how they can best fill those gaps, whether it's organically, acquisitions, alliances.